This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
We are TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome, listeners from America and across the world. I'm your host, Zane Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio, and I thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. As always, we've got a very interesting show lined up for you this evening, and I have a very special guest, my friend, author Brett Thomas. Brett, are you there, brother?
I am.
All right, excellent. I've been looking forward to doing this show for a long time. I know you've been very busy on authoring the many different books that you have released, and so if you would, tell people about your website and also your books and what they are about and where they can go to find and purchase and support you in your endeavors.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you very much, Sen, for having me here. I'm very proud and grateful for that. The two websites that I have up currently are mysterybabylon.com and I have mystery-babylon.org. The .org site is fairly for new people who want to just learn a little bit about it, tidbits of what Mystery Babylon might be all about. The mysterybabylon.com site is a little more geared towards the books at hand. They have snippets, some chapter summaries, etc. Those are the two websites. And the two books that I have, the first volume is called The Rise of Mystery Babylon, The Way of Cain. And the second two are actually another volume, but they were rather large, so I had to cut them in half. But it's The Rise of Mystery Babylon, Volume 2, The Tower of Babel. And all of these are on Amazon and other large bookseller websites. And they are on the two websites that I have.
All right, excellent. Well, if you would, tell us a little bit about each and what inspired you to write them, and also how you got into the, as far as investigating and what led you to compile and write this information into book form.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll tell you that part first.
Sure.
About 25 years ago, my father was dying, and on his deathbed, he pretty much made me promise never to end up like him. And I took that upon myself to do a little research, and I noticed he would be stressed and mentally stressed, and as he would be mentally stressed, his physical health would get a lot worse. And I always started wondering why the medical profession didn't really point out so much on that element of things, rather than just giving you a pill and just telling you to go home and that. So I started researching. I wanted to find out what was the links, why when he had fear, guilt, stress, whatever. So it started out that, and that was about 25 years ago, and as one question was answered, another one would pop up. And as I would learn more about things all around us and how you would think and how that might be stressing you out inside internally, and what to eat, what not to eat, etc. The questions started getting deeper and deeper, and they became more profound and more spiritual, let's just say. They started getting into the biblical definition of stress, or fear, guilt, pride. And as I kept going and researching further, it just started going back into Genesis and into the stories of the Bible, which seem to be applicable today. And I always loved the early stories of Genesis, especially when I was young, when I was a child. And it just clicked in over the years. So as these questions were being answered, as I said, new ones would be generated. And eventually I came to the Mystery Babylon concept. And it's mentioned in Revelation, but just to understand it is what is truly a mystery. It took a lot of research. It was 15, 20 years worth of just on and off as much as I can do. And I assembled these books together the best I could to really describe what a lot of the things that we weren't being taught nowadays, as far as I'm concerned, and I believe. I mean, churches give us a lot, our society gives us a lot of information, but for some reason, a lot of these things have just fallen through the cracks. Would you like me to describe the books a little bit then first? Would you like more comments?
Yeah, if you would describe each of the volumes, what inspired you to write and compile them, and what they are mainly about,
Okay.
because they are quite extensive.
Yeah. The first one, The Way of Cain, was, I eventually left out some of these research I did about how stress affects your body when the early stuff that I did, and I just placed it all into the spiritual realm, into the Bible, and into everything on that end of the spectrum. So I found patterns, and Jesus himself said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the final coming of the sons of man, or the Son of Man, which is himself in the second coming." So I knew I started finding patterns between my research into that time of Noah, into the time before Noah, and today, and it's pretty extensive and it's pretty interesting. And that's one part is, I think it's in Jude, where they say, "Woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain," and that's a lot of what the first book entails. It gives an extensive look in who actually Cain was and how he was actually very important in the pagan world. You know, we toss him off as just killing his brother and that's it, but the more I've researched in pagan elements and in elements contrary to the Bible, the more that I found out that he was a central figure, him, the serpent, and himself.
Right.
And your work too, Zen, really helped inspire me too. I just thought I'd let you know that.
I appreciate that.
The Lucifer, Father of Cain, I really enjoyed that book. That helped, one of the first books I purchased, actually. The second volume, when I was done with the first volume, it was good. I liked it, but there was so much more research and extras that I had, and I realized to myself, okay, I could send this one off, but I don't really think it answers everything. It's a good scenario and take into more of the cultural and societal parallels of Cain and his ways in the ancient times, but there's more to it. And I knew there was a lot more in politics and a lot more in religious beliefs that were corrupt, let's say serpent-like, satanic, etc., that are being fed to us. And I knew there was a lot more answers that I wasn't getting. So the other two was the culmination of that continued research, and I thought, okay, I might as well put both of them out at the same time because they really complement each other. And the Tower of Babel is somewhat similar. It does have those parallels again from the times of Noah, because obviously we know, or a lot of us know, that right after the flood, in the days of Noah, they built the Tower of Babel and the great unification of people, but it was all contrary to God. Nowadays, the same thing seems to be going on, and we seem to have a unification of people, and again, it's Antichrist, it's contrary to God. The same exact patterns and concepts, they're all coming together again, and it all kind of centers around this, what Jesus said about being a parallel between them and the end times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree, and my research also led me to similar discernment, and with regard to the serpent and Cain and being the patriarch, in my opinion, the progenitor for the elitists, the New World Order elites, and it explains, once you understand what occurred in the garden, as to what we are dealing with now, and that we are not all the same people, and you know that the whole reason why we have this enmity playing out between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent is because Cain, who was of that wicked one, he actually was a physical hybrid child of the devil. And these people do worship their fathers, the fallen angels, and are involved in all kind of abomination, pedophilia, cannibalism, the drinking of blood, sacrifice of children, things like that. And the Bible's very clear about what they were doing even back then, and it's ongoing even to this day and age.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I totally agree. A lot of the fallen angels were known for that in these
Right.
ancient texts in the Bible, especially cannibalism and drinking the blood. And they got really violent before the flood, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yep. Well, let's go ahead and go a little bit into some of your work, because in reading the first volume, which it's very extensive, and I really like the way that you write, because we are similar in that we share the myriad of sources, that we find from all these different, not just the extra biblical material, but you also read commentaries and things of that sort, other books written by other authors, and sharing the quotations and citations. How long did it take you to do the research for all of this material? Because I know you share quite an extensive, as far as library of work from other people, sources, ancient manuscripts.
Yeah, there's over 3,000 quotes, footnotes. I really got serious just a little before 2000 and revised the book a few times, added different names. So what is it now, 17, 18 years? It's quite a long time. I think you'll agree with me, Zen, that I think if you look at other elements besides just the extra biblical, they still could have relevance. They just say their opinions and their stories from an opposite point of view. It doesn't mean that it's horrible to look at, to listen to, look at, read. It's not that it might not be even truth. But it's just a lot of Christians, I think, nowadays get a little bit scared to say, "Oh, I looked at this pagan document or this occult document," not necessarily a cult, but you have to. I think you'll agree with me. You really need a lot of discernment when you look at other biblical parabiblical works, because you can tell where they're leading you. Some of the information might be good in there to understand. It might apply to your story. That's what I used a lot in here, but I would not go against the Bible at all. And if it did go against the Bible, I would say, okay, no, I understand. Bye, see ya. Right. But it does help fill in the blanks. And I know you have a lot of those books that you use too, and they're quite interesting. And I think they do offer a lot of blank filling in capabilities and possibilities, don't you think?
Absolutely, without a doubt. In my opinion, because again, during the ancient times, and especially during the first generation, when the church was really being established, there was no Bible. There was no authorized, as far as this manuscript is good, and the rest, stay away from. Right. There was none of that. They were reading and studying everything. And people in churches, they prized many manuscripts, and kept them, they prized them. And so, and they weren't able to just print out multiple copies and share them. They had to be handwritten, and they, had to be done over long periods of time, and careful to, as far as the detail of what they were translating and the manner that they were translating. So it was a very difficult task to make multiple copies of any text. So texts were prized and valued, and only, like for instance, in the book of Esdras, we are shown that Esdras is told to only share 70 of the books with the masses, and then the rest he was to keep only for the elect. And Enoch was told the same. in his book, the first book of Enoch. Um, and so many books were prized and they were kept away from certain people and they were cherished. And it's not like now where we have full access to a huge library of material. Never before have we had access to knowledge and wisdom in the manner that we do now. And yet, still, because of the authorized canon and the Council of Nicaea and the whole debate and the condemnation of certain texts, people shy away from and don't even utilize that access to read or study so much material. The mainstream churches basically tell you that these books are okay, the rest you are to avoid. And because of that, that limitation that's basically imposed on everybody, most people shy away from and do not study this extra biblical material. But when you do, like for instance, one of the reasons why I began to study a lot of this extra biblical material was because of Genesis 6. Reading about the sons of God mating with the daughters of man and creating a race of giants. When I first read that, I was like, what? What did I just read? Fallen angels, giants. And so I totally wanted to know more. And as far as the Bible, you have Jude and Peter, and short commentary about them and about the fallen ones. And there's giants all scattered through the Pentateuch, and David and Goliath and other things like that. But for the most part, it's very ambiguous as to the full story of the fall of the Watchers, unless you read like the Book of Enoch or the Kebra Nagast or things like that. And so that was why I began to study. And in doing so, one of the central themes that kept revealing itself to me as well was the whole concept that Cain was a child of the serpent, and that this is the reason why he and his bloodline are separated from the genealogy of Adam in chapter 4 and Adam's line in chapter 5. And so, when I embraced that, and started to compile my notes and about that, I wrote my fourth book, Lucifer, Father of Cain, on that theme. And little did I realize that in doing so, I would be basically blacklisting myself from a lot of people and a lot of alternative truth platforms without even realizing it. I had no idea that just bringing up this knowledge would find me condemned and criticized and, basically blacklisted from so many people and so many programs, and a lot of people just not wanting to have affiliation with me. But yet, I know without a doubt it is truth, and yet so many are unwilling to go there or to embrace it or to stand with it. And I really still don't even understand the fullness of why that is and why this concept is so greatly hated, other than that the forces aligned against it, the children of Cain, the serpent seed, that they don't want to be exposed. They don't want humanity to know about them, or that there is a different bloodline here, and that they are the ones that are ruling from behind the scenes. So, and I think that they have instituted such programming and such bias that they are able to keep themselves secret, and and even though everybody knows about New World Order and all that now, still everybody denies this aspect of the truth. And in my opinion, it is the skeleton key for unlocking so much that remains hidden within Scripture.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing how people flat out deny it so quickly whenever you even bring it up. I mean, I even think about, when I think about the serpent, it just didn't make sense to me that it was a snake. just slithering around with vocal cords and talking, and Eve wasn't surprised that a snake came up and talked with her. I mean, it just, I know things were different. I'm sure they were back in the garden time before the fall, but let's think logically here. I just can't picture an intelligent being actually being a slithering snake. It just doesn't make sense to me. But, the serpent was the name that was translated, because he does have a proper name. I'm sure as you know, and there are a lot of different characteristics of the serpent, and there's those Hebrewisms I think we get, and some people, you've heard about where God judged him and says, on your belly you shall crawl, right, and you shall lick the dust. I mean, those could quite honestly and quite probably be those Hebrewisms, those figures of speech in ancient Hebrew time, like, you're licking the dust, you're nothing. You're going to crawl on your belly. It's like those people who are yellow bellies, or you're on your belly. You're going to be worthless. You're going to be nothing. Those could easily be, which I believe they are, those Hebrew figures of speech. But it's easy for people to say, well, he must have been a serpent then because he crawls on his belly. But serpents don't eat dust. They eat small animals. And what would be the use of that curse that God gave humanity here, where he says, sons of Adam and Eve will be at enmity of sons of the serpent? I mean, does it make that much big of a deal if people are afraid of snakes? I don't think that matters spiritually as far as humanity is concerned and our future.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I discovered in reading a lot of the ancient commentaries, that even I believe that the serpent or the reptilians are feeding on the flesh of humanity and are cannibals, and that the dust is also that our bodies are made of dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that sort of thing. But in studying, looking at these different things, we get even more understanding. Again, when I first read Genesis and went through Genesis 3 and Eve eating this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the consequences of their actions are that she would then now be bring forth children in sorrow, and that there would be enmity between the, speaking to the serpent, I will place enmity between thy seed and her seed. And so right there it tells us that the serpent has seed. And when you look up that word seed in the Hebrew, it's zera, and it comes forth as children, progeny, descendants, semen, virility. I mean, it's completely tied to a family tree and a bloodline and a lineage. And so undeniable, in my opinion, when you study the Hebrew, you can't get around that the results of her eating this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was that she became pregnant, and that Cain was the firstborn son of the devil, which is another reason why it made such complete sense to me. Is how did, if it was Adam and Eve and they were both innocent, how is it that Cain is so wicked to become a murderer, a liar, deceiver? If he is coming from these two very innocent, even though they did eat, but they were not evil. And so that in and of itself also shows that he was of the wicked one, as it also says in Scripture. But let me get you to comment on that.
Yeah, it says that in the New Testament, doesn't it?
Right.
I think a lot of the modern day and in the past, pastors, preachers, and those of the cloth try to basically say that, those are just spiritual references. It's a spiritual war. There's nothing seed-like. It's just all in spiritual. Don't you agree with me, Zen, on that?
Yeah, absolutely. They try to explain it away that way.
Yeah. I heard that, and I think it's true. I think the two books of the Bible that Satan hates the most are Genesis and Revelation. And it's because Revelation tells where he's going, and Genesis tells where he comes from, or where he originates.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And that's, like you said, I think the exposure part of it is why people are being pressured in the faith to just not even go there. I just think it's a good idea to go someplace and to look farther, because if the Bible is God's perfect word, which I believe it is, I think everything in there is there for a reason.
Absolutely.
And let's just look at what was it, Lamech? Remember that? Wasn't he the one? He had his song after he killed somebody, and he
Hold on, brother.
Huh?
Yeah, hold on. We're at break. We'll be right back, everyone.
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
And in those days, there were giants in the land, and the sons of the angels of God looked upon the daughters of men and found them fair, and took of them wives, and their sons became of old great men of renown. So they have been mixing with us on a genetic level since the time of Enoch and Ezekiel's will.
Here on Earth we're intrigued by the sun, moon, and stars, and imagine there's got to be planets like ours. So conceive of a face on the surface of Mars, so in need of a meaning and purpose we've lost. And indeed they believe that these might be our gods, or that maybe with time we'll do right and evolve, and eventually reach what they seek, and then solve all the problems of man. But they really don't know that they fall in the works of our hands are but just filthy rags. So we travel the lands to dig up our past time, our lapses, and with it are much of the facts. Some imagine that gods came in alien crafts. They react in this way, they're so desperate for me.
It is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. One of the, because so many people do deny that the Bible covers or speaks about serpent seed in any manner, and yet Yeshua in Matthew chapter 13 undoubtedly speaks about in several parables the kingdom, the sower, the parables of the field. It speaks about this particular lesson and reveals in clarity to the apostles after the multitudes are sent away that indeed, without question, that the enemy which snuck into the garden and that sowed the tares is the wicked one, the same wicked one mentioned in 1 John chapter 3 verse 12, where it says Cain, who was of that wicked one, of being son of, child of, or progeny of, a descendant of, without question, it's speaking about him as a son of the devil. And so, and then, again, with clarity, he tells us that the tares are the children of the wicked one, and that the devil is their father. And then we have, after that, all throughout the New Testament, where he is referencing, you are of your father the devil, and he says that your fathers and your parents, and they were the murderers of the prophets from Abel to Zacharias, and Cain being the murderer of Abel. There's no way around it. And yet, again, they will not touch it and just dance around it and, always say it's a spiritual concept when, again, it says with clarity that the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. And so we know that the war, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, it says without question that let both grow together until the time of the end. And so the serpent seed, the children of Cain, were not wiped out in entirety in the flood. This war continues unabated until the end of days, when he returns to separate the harvest. When he sends the angels forth as reapers, they then gather the tares for burning and the wheat for preservation. And then that is when every knee shall bow, every tongue confess, and everybody will be judged, and those that are worthy will be numbered with the elect, and then go on to reign with him in New Jerusalem for the millennial reign, the Sabbath rest. Right.
In my view, I don't think if the Bible is what it is, and if God makes a promise, it has to be kept. So if he did make a promise that there would be enmity beyond the flood, then the seeds of Cain had to survive.
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt.
It shouldn't have just been spiritual or anything. As I was saying before about Lamech, other sources are good to look at, because the Bible has one little explanation there. He's sad, he cries. He said he killed one person for one reason, another person for another reason, and the Bible leaves it alone. Now, my thought on that is, why would that even be in the Bible if it's not meant to be researched or found?
Right. Mm.
And you know, like the Book of Jubilees and these other extra biblical sources, they give explanations. I think there's some Mormon texts, the Book of Abraham maybe, or that gives an explanation on that.
Mm-hmm,
but
right.
you do gather information on these parts of the Bible that are a little obscured. Where did Cain get his wife, etc. These books that I have, they're not. I don't want to feel like I'm stepping on any toes. I had no agenda when I first started writing either. I was trying to learn why my dad got sick the way he did. I wanted to just find answers. And so it's curious how, and I think I mentioned to you this before, is how you started your research from what you started. And I started my research just from that, and it went on farther. But you and I ended at practically the same
place, right?
Same place. And it's interesting how that just ended up that way. I didn't take an agenda, and I don't want these books to feel like there is an agenda to them. There's more of just piling everything together that I've found to possibly make a story out of these parts of the Bible that might be a little obscured, like the giants and like the flood, and were there more than just Noah's family on the flood, and what really happened in the garden, who was the serpent for real. I'm getting answers from the clergy, and it just doesn't make sense to me. And that's why part of the reasons why I think, partly, like you said, I think they were obscured for a reason, for exposure. Once we learn about these things and learn deeper, again, mine's organic. I just came and started at nothing, and I fell into these thoughts, and they make sense to me. And it makes even more sense when you find out that the reason that you're being poo-pooed and not being allowed to even look at these things theologically is because it is partially something that might expose what might be going on around us. Don't you agree?
Without doubt, yeah, absolutely. And again, that's why I think, because the children of Cain have, since the very beginning, attempted to keep themselves hidden, and have worked behind the scenes and from the shadows. And that's all, even now with the secret societies, the blood oaths and the secrecy, that they have to really give up their lives, even if they speak about or share any of what goes on behind the scenes with the New World Order and what they're doing, the agenda, the protocols, and as far as the New World Order. And so, yeah, they have always utilized, and Satan has utilized secrecy as a way to keep themselves hidden and their agenda hidden. And it's only now that we're at the end of days and all things are being revealed that a lot of this is coming to light. Before then, people really gave up their lives even to bring forth any information about what they were doing from behind the scenes. And now we know, because I do believe that we're at the end of days as the fig tree generation, that all things are being revealed to light. And so, and now they're not even trying to hide anything. They are openly boasting about the New World Order. Politicians and people from, prominent positions all over the world are openly calling for and declaring. The popes even declaring for a New World Order, world government. And in my opinion, all that is being set up for the reign of the Antichrist, which again is this bloodline. That is basically the Antichrist, the false Messiah, an alien god, is being set up to be the returning creator, benefactor, and the one that will establish the world government here at the end of days. That the beast system that is spoken about in the Bible, Mystery Babylon, all of that is all connected. The woman that rides on the scarlet beast, all these things. And so, but I do want to talk about a couple other things as well. You also write about and speak about a previous world age and how the earth became without form and void, which in the Hebrew is became a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. And so, if you would talk about that some, and also the pre-adamites, or the people before the creation of Adam in Genesis 2:7, just mention some of that as well, and then we'll go into greater detail on this Samael and what happened in the garden and all that.
Okay, I had another feeling about the beginning of Genesis, especially Genesis 1, chapter 1, about how the earth was created a void, and then and darkness was on the earth, and there was water all over the earth. Why would God create a planet that would be void? Because void seems to be a term used to describe after a disaster, after nothing.
Exactly right.
Right. So as I was researching, as I said, one question, seemed to be answered, another one opened up. I just started going into maybe the thoughts of, okay, can I find any ancient works here, any works from any other authors? I don't care where I go for the most part. And I know that you agree with me that it just takes that discernment to pick through it. You have to pick through the work to understand what might be good in there, the pieces of the meat that might be good, and what might be gristle. I mean, you can tell the way they're leading you. Like some of the Gnostic Gospels, I don't really like to look at. There's some information in there that I use, and that's historical, etc. But the Book of Enoch is a perfect example of a great book that was not canonized, but for some reason it just has so much good material. I think it's because of the angels, the references to the angels as being more than the sons of Seth. That's what I strongly think.
Absolutely.
It wasn't canonized. But anyhow, going back to that, I actually found some Islamic works that actually talked about and brought up the times right before Genesis 1. Okay, and I've stumbled upon in my research the gap theory, and I'm sure you've heard of it, but if others haven't, I'll try to describe it really quickly. It's the theory that in between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, there was actually a gap of time, and we don't know how long, but in Genesis 1:1, it basically says God created the heaven and the earth. And then the heaven, and then the earth was out without form and void, and then etc. etc. That's Genesis 1:2. Now, what the gap theory points at is, could there have been other worlds? The Earth could have been itself and stayed the same physical plane, planet, whatever you call it, this whole time. But could God have destroyed the previous world? Maybe it was sinning too. Maybe it was their time. Maybe a number of times it could have gotten destroyed, because even science points to that there was a fifth extinction and this is the sixth extinction on its way, etc. So could there have been, because the difference lies in the terms earth and world. Okay, earth, the physical plane, the physical planet, the physical everything that we look around us, that's earth. And in the Bible you get the word worlds. Okay, worlds, organized cosmos. Okay, what you see around you, the how the sun is, we got one moon, how everything looks, an organized cosmos. Could have organized cosmos have been around before Genesis 1-2, and for whatever reason, God needed to destroy it and bring up. Maybe the water that was on the whole earth was a remnant and all that's left of the former world. And God decided to refashion the earth in those 6 days. I'm not trying to promote evolution or say that I agree at evolution at any point, but the earth doesn't necessarily have to be 6,000 years old, but this present working world could be. This organized cosmos that we see could be. That's my concept. What do you think, Zen?
I absolutely agree with you that when I began to study and examine Genesis and going through it and studying the Hebrew behind it, it became clear to me. In Isaiah 45:18, that speaks about how the Most High had created the world's perfect and to be inhabited, and yet here we see that the earth clearly was destroyed and became destroyed, and so He wouldn't create it, in my opinion, incomplete. And then, we see in Genesis and the rest of the narrative that the earth is being restored and reformed and refashioned. So, in my mind, why wouldn't God just finish it to begin with?
Right.
Why have to restore it? And so it showed to me that something led to, and that there was a judgment, some kind of judgment brought upon the earth in a prior time. And this, everything that I've studied and even the Atlantean mysteries, those things are also incorporated and tied into this theme. And so, yes, I also read about it in great detail. And then it also says in Esdras, in second Esdras, that he had created the earth perfect, and then later something had happened that it became destroyed. And so, yeah, I fully agree with you on that as well. I know you're beginning your journey with regard to the cosmology and looking into all of that, but yeah, we agree on so many levels with regard to truth and examining the word. And as I said, I have great admiration and respect for your work because of the number of sources and the material that you bring forth to affirm your own work as truth. Because in my opinion, out of the mouths of two or three witnesses shall the truth be established. And having these multiple sources, that it shows, and the more the better. And so that's why I always, like you, I have hundreds of quotations, hundreds of sources in each of my books to affirm what I'm bringing forth as truth. But yeah, so talk a little bit more about some of the other things that you've found that were interesting in bringing forth your first book, and then we'll go into the other volumes in a short bit.
Okay. The pre-adamites have always been an interest to me. It's it's obscured, and a lot of people try to down even the concept and the thought of it. And the more I researched, the thought comes to mind would be, okay, the clergy and the religious elite want us to say that we're all from Adam. Could that be because if they're holding the keys to the Bible and the authority to the Bible, wouldn't that make them the authority over everybody? Because if we all weren't from Adam, some people could actually say to them, well, I'm not under your authority because this is the book of the generation of Adam, which I think it says in Genesis 5:1. Right. So could there be other people in the garden at this time? And the more I did a little research on that, the more these same titles seem to be coming. Beasts of the field, the behemoth, the fowl of the air, the creeping things that creepeth. Of course, they're translated into the King James and other versions like that, because the translators, I'm sure, assumed that they were animals. So they for some reason they felt the need and thought that the Bible would be putting them into different groups. Like if you're small animals, then you'd be crawling. If you're birds, you'd be flying. I mean, wouldn't it be simpler for God to say when he was time to bring the animals, those groups of animals in the ark, why couldn't he just say God brought the animals into the ark? Why did it have to be these certain groups? It just started to not really make sense to me why these certain groups keep being referred to all the time. Okay, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that, you know, time back then, people spoke about people differently, and you would, if you called somebody a beast, or it wasn't necessarily a beast, because the actual Hebrew for that word, kai, and I think that could also mean living creatures of the field or a community, you know, and those could easily be a human community. It doesn't mean the stigma and the ability to try to downplay even saying that the chai of the field or the beasts of the field could be anything more than a group of cattle is just prevalent everywhere. You just get shot down right away if you even start to mention that. But it just seems to make sense that if you look around at all the different peoples around us, it just, I would not want to say that only one group started and then the other ones that are different, why are they different? Are they cursed? Are they sentenced by God to be? I don't want to make it look like or think that other people in the world are there because of some kind of wrongdoing or something. Why couldn't there be the main groups of people or different groups in the garden as in all the way from the beginning? That is the pre-Adamite theory. It makes sense, and the more you dig into it, the more you start to understand that there's verses in the Bible that talk about these, you know, they talk about the behemoth. They actually cried out to God for mercy, or they, you know, what was the verse in the Bible where I think it was, I wasn't sure which city. Was it Nineveh, where they put sackcloth on the animal? They said they put it on the animals, but what do the animals do wrong? I mean, could these behemoths that they put sackcloth on, I mean, why would these behemoths, these animals, be crying out to God? There's a lot of these verses that talk about hands, feet of these particular groups. And it might lead one to believe, could there actually be different races, different peoples out there in the garden? Could it have been a large garden that actually Adam was at the helm?
Yeah, you know, looking at and examining the scriptures in greater depth, there's a lot of things that come to light, which most people are not speaking about or examining. Which one of the major themes for both of us was the fruit. You know, the fruit, and how eating this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil led to the pregnancy, the punishment that she would bring forth children in sorrow. One of the most favorite texts for me in studying the ancient manuscripts is to read the Targum, because I find that we are given just so much more information on every passage, every chapter, which seems to remain ambiguous in the King James. Like, for instance, the punishment spoken about here in Genesis 3:16. It says in the Targum, unto the woman he said, multiplying, I will multiply thy affliction by the blood of thy virginity and by thy conception. In sorrow shalt thou bear children, and to thy husband shall be thy desire, and he will have rule over thee unto righteousness or unto sin. And so, these kind of things, and even the Genesis story, everything, even with going into Genesis 4:1, where it's speaking about the birth of, as far as Adam knowing his wife Eve, there's a particular passage in there, and Adam knew Hava, his wife, who had desired the angel, and she conceived and bare Cain, semicolon, and then she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. And then she added to bear from her husband Adam, his twin. And so, this particular passage, which is left out of the King James, who had desired the angel, in my mind, that tells a whole lot about the situation and what occurred in the garden. Because in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul tells us about how Eve had lost her chastity because the serpent beguiled her. And the only way a woman can lose her chastity, her virginity, is to be sexually, physically corrupted. And so, again, these kind of things only make sense when you interpret the whole garden, the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as being metaphorical and sexually symbolic of, some kind of carnal association. And so, and then when you do read it, interpret it like that, everything makes sense. All right, we'll be right back for second hour.
Okay.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for second hour. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. And I have a special guest with me, Brett Thomas. He's the author of 3 books, very jam-packed and loaded with information on Mystery Babylon, The Way of Cain, and also The Tower of Babel. How many pages are each of your books, Brett?
The first one, The Way of Cain, is about 500. And as I said, I had to split the Tower of Babel into 2 because it got a little big. So each one is about 418, and the next one's 430.
Yeah, very extensive. And they're huge. They're like 8.5 by 11.5, right? Like a regular sheet of paper?
Yes, sir. Yeah. I when I try to research, I try to find everything and every bit of the answer that I could. So it made sense to just throw all of that in there so it would help complement each other. I wanted every part of the book to be complemented some other part. I just didn't want to throw a part in that wasn't making sense or relevant. So that's why it got a little large.
Yeah, and really you have them priced very well as well. You're selling them for how much?
The first one is $20.95 on Amazon. It's probably one of the cheapest, and the other ones are $17.95, I think, and $16.95 on Amazon. I want them to be read, and they're even on Kindle. I have all 3 of them on Kindle too for like $4.95, $5. So I want them. I value them more as being read. If you can get them on Kindle, great. I just want people. I wanted to get it out there. I want people to read them just to kind of see what they might have been missing all these years. Because I know I have been missing a lot, and I've always had that thought that there's just something more out there and something more to be understood out there. And I'm sure you had those same thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's why I just want to get them as much out as I can, and people reading it, because it makes me feel better that actually more people are coming to light and
Right.
to seeing these other alternate explanations in the Bible.
Right. And my books are also very expensive. Several of them, most of my manuscripts are over 400 pages, which I know a lot of people shy away from very large books, but I do find that those that are interested in the truth and that are readers, they really appreciate having, the full summation of all the information available. And so I know people will enjoy and greatly appreciate all the work that you put forth in your books as well.
Thank you.
And so, where again can they go to find them? Just on
They can
Amazon?
They can go on Amazon, and they can go to Barnes and Noble or other websites, and they can go to mysterybabylon.com. That's one of my websites, and the other one is mystery-babylon.org. And they're for sale.
Do you offer autographed copies? Like if people were to,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they write to you or something.
Actually, yes, I'll do it for nothing. On my websites, they're even cheaper. Actually, now that I think about it, I've lowered them like $3 or $4 each on my two websites, because like I said, I just want to get them out. I want to get people reading and curious.
So awesome. Well, definitely everybody go and check that out, because as I said, these books are quite extensive and they will give you a whole lot of source information to go and verify the premise of the work that he's done, that I've done. Dr. Joy, another one of our authors, she also writes, but she doesn't use any of the extra biblical material. She only writes mostly from the King James, but also has come to the same discernment as both you and I with regard to the Serpent Seed. She's written a 3-volume set called Beguiled from Eden to Armageddon, which covers, all of it like the way that we have. But if you would, Brett, can you talk about the 2-volume The Tower of Babel set and what all of it is about? And let's go into some of that material.
Okay. The Way of Cain was more of a book that tried to stay within the boundaries of Cain himself and how he became famous, and it tried to stay within the boundaries of our culture and how we think and how we perceive our culture, and what affects the ways of Cain, like it's said in Jude, the ways of Cain have. The next couple, which are the Tower of Babel, it's another parallel in a way of the times of Noah to the times of now. And it deals with more of politics, changing government policy into laws, religious laws, beliefs, thoughts, dogma. Those type of thoughts, those type of leanings and perceptions are what is more of the parallels of these next two books. And to do that, I needed to go deeper. And I needed to go deeper into the stories of Adam and Eve, Cain and the serpent, the seed of the serpent, and even the flood. It was also to give the reader a little treat into thoughts about these early biblical stories that they might not have actually perceived or understood, that there's so much more out there to actually point towards answers in the Bible. As I said, I don't ever want to do anything that's against the perfection of the Bible itself. It's only complementary, and if there's something that in there that's against it, I take it out. I don't want anything to do with it. But there is so much out there, and I know I'm sure agree with me, Zen, that complements the Bible in these ancient books and texts. So inserting all of these other things into the whole story helps us to possibly see that where the world is and who the bad guys really are. The first part of Tower of Babel Part 1, I named it the first chapter, the Babylonian gods of Genesis, for example. And it was interesting. What I did was I went into ancient mythology, and a lot of these stories in ancient mythologies are actually mirror images or parallels of the Garden of Eden, of Bible stories. And a lot of these characters are actually Adam, Eve, the serpent, Cain, Abel. A lot of these ancient gods actually have their equivalency in the Bible. And the reason I do that, again, is to try to show that a lot of these other ancient sources that might be out there, even though they don't point you towards God, or even they might be extra biblical and not like Enoch, or not exactly allowed in the Bible, they still could provide information. They might even be looking through a different set of glasses. So that's why I basically, and let's on this first chapter, I showed how ancestor worship, okay, it's the worship of the serpent. If the serpent is the ultimate ancestor of a lot of these people in blood or in theology, and are they grafted onto it? Ancestor worship is just exactly that. It's the worship of the ultimate ancestor, which was the serpent and his son Cain. And you notice so many of these pagan religions out there and these other forms of thought are all ancestor worship, or majority of them are. So paralleling all of these different gods with the Bible helps to actually fortify and strengthen the Bible itself. In my opinion, it absolutely strengthens the story, because it doesn't just turn it into one other story in the multitude of stories out there from the past. It actually brings them all together in a way that it gives validity to Genesis and to the early parts of the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's the story of Cain and his bloodline begins even before, because I cover this in great detail with the first book of the Great Contest series, The War in Heaven, and tie it together with the rebellion of Lucifer and the fallen angels and the division of light and darkness, the war in heaven. That was the beginning of the separation between these two factions, what became the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And then what we see as unfolding in the garden with the birth of Cain and Abel, that's the beginning of the bloodlines, the physical progeny of both God and the devil, and what I call the great contest here on the earth between these two people groups. And so we see that, as Christ said again, let both grow together until the time of the end. So this war would be ongoing, and is still ongoing even in this day and age. And so can you talk about that story as well? How far have you traced it with regard to Cain and Abel? Because I see even the differences between Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, the children of Jacob, the 12 tribes, and what became Esau's children, the Canaanites, the Hamites, all the pagan nations which surround Israel, and Abraham's children as the promised seed as far as through Isaac. Can you talk about that and what you've seen in your research connected to all that?
Okay, which one did you want to hear more about, the Cain, or did you want to more about Esau, or?
Well, let's just go down. Cain and Abel, talk about that war, and then we see that all by the time of Noah, that everybody, all the children of Adam had gone the way of Cain. And then we see after the war that it is the Hamites, the Canaanites, which are considered the seed of the serpent. Just how you trace it down through the generations, to also Isaac and Ishmael. Just kind of every step going through the whole process. Yeah.
Okay. And again, I got a lot from extra biblical sources and pagan or whatever. So a lot of this might sound new, some of it. But I believe that Cain and the ancient Sargon, which is an ancient, I think he's Babylonian, Sargon, it actually, Sar can be traced and was thought to be the word king, and Gon was an ancient term that's thought to be Cain. So Sargon, King Cain. King Cain. Cain became an actual, he didn't just wander and nod and wither away into nothingness. According to a lot of these ancient texts, he actually became very powerful with the help of the serpent, of course. But he became strong and controlled the salt trade. I've researched and he almost had his own practical empire before the flood. Started building. We know he built at least the one city, Enoch, but the ancient sources tell us that he actually built up to 7, and Babylon was one of them. The ancient Babylon before the flood, and his empire was just bringing everybody together under his own pagan view, his own anti-God, anti-Christ view of the world. And this included the fallen angels, the Nephilim. So that's what helped to actually corrupt things all the worse, because you didn't just have sons of the serpent out there. You had the giants, and you had the watchers mixing with human women, and you had a lot of this gene corruption going on that actually compounded the problems in the earth exponentially. One thing I always try to state in these books is it's important to understand. I also believe that Abel, now this is my own belief, but I believe Abel, I believe they were twins. And when you're talking about she went on to birth Abel, I believe that actually both of them were sons of the devil, in a way. And
yeah, I've heard that in some of the Gnostic texts, and other people like Olive, a friend of mine who actually comes on, is a guest in my Revolution radio show. He also believes that as well. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, it's because, and again, I go by what I found and what I researched, and what I find all these years. I don't start out with an agenda. If something changes my mind, if I find a good source that actually does that, but it just seemed to make sense, and it jived with the Bible when Seth was born. Adam looked at him and he said, "This is the first son that actually looks like me," and that's in the Bible. And I'm wondering, okay, well, if Abel was of Adam, why didn't he look like Adam? Why would he make that explanation in Genesis like that? And again, I think it's because Abel and Cain were both sons of the devil. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean if you even have the blood of the devil, of the serpent, that doesn't mean you're destined to be mean, evil, hated, killer. Because look what Abel did. Abel made a choice. So this is kind of where we go into the grafting into the ways of God. I mean, we had the harlot, I think it was at Jericho, who actually helped the Israelites. I mean, it's people. Right. It's people actually, I believe that the Bible gives us a choice, no matter who you are, even be a child of the devil. If you decide, you have free will, and you can make a choice. And you could choose to follow God as Abel did. But Cain just made his choice too. And look what road he went down. So that's why I'm trying, some of the themes in this book is just try to say that anybody, you can make the right choices if you want to. Okay. Unfortunately, though, Abel suffered for it and he got killed. But there were a few left, actually, but by the time of Noah, the amount of people who actually tried to stay up. I guess it was Mount Hermon that a lot of sources claim that those of God tried to just get up on the mountain and stay away from the sons of Cain and the sons of the angels and the giants and the Nephilim and everybody that was just trying to bring them down, because these angels knew when they were fallen, they became fallen. They knew that this was the end of their days. Once they were dead, there was no afterlife. Because this is what I've researched. Once they were dead in this mortal being, there was nothing for them. They were gone. So one thought that they can do is that they can corrupt the seed of man totally. They could negate that promise, that Genesis 3:15 curse that God said, basically, from Adam and Eve, there will be a Savior that will crush the serpent's head. And that will be Jesus. So what they tried to do is they tried to fill the world with compromised seed, corrupt every single person that was before the flood. And if they figured if they can do that, God tried to make a promise. And if they could negate that promise by all these corruptions, and there's no more pure seed left of Adam and Eve to bring on the Savior, they've averted their own fate. But we find out that a good reason for the flood was maybe God wanted to, he makes a promise and he wants to keep it. So maybe God wanted to make sure that some pure seed still made it through and were able to regenerate and keep going until the Savior was born, the Messiah. So the flood did come along. It did save a number of people, and it did wipe out the trajectory of what the world was going to before the flood. After the flood, we have the same thing starting up again. It was only about 200 years later. It was like a grandson of Noah. You have Cush and you have Nimrod, and you have these power players of Ham's seed. And I believe that some Cainites, obviously, I believe some Cainites made it through on the ark. And Ham was probably like half Cainite. I believe his mother was. One of Noah's wives was, according to the research. So Ham, even though he had some blood of Noah, he did fall to a little bit of corruption, and he started going down the same paths as the serpent and as Cain, his son. And that's where you get the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel was basically supposed to be to reach into heaven, a great show of pride in humanity, the human race, everything contrary to God. It was supposed to be a symbol of, just like kind of like cities were. They were supposed to be, because God didn't really want the people to go into cities per se. He'd rather have them into tents and just living more of a pastoral life, simpler lives. But Cain, since he started before the flood, Nimrod and Cush began the thoughts of, okay, let's resurrect these cities of Cain again. Let's start it all over again. Let's resurrect the ways of Cain again. And that's pretty much how the same thing happened after the flood as before. Going down the line, then we get into Esau and Jacob. And Esau, that's another whole nother story, but Esau was basically, most of us know that he lost his birthright. And I believe that sons of Esau, the Edomites, are still around in their various factions today trying to get the birthright back that Israel now has.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever get into that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I cover all that as well.
What would you like to?
How about let's go into just talking about the Pharisees. Do you know why it is that the Pharisees were called as far as the children of the devil, and how it was that they came to usurp the as far as the authority, the rabbinical authority.
Yeah.
Going back to Joshua and the tribe that acted like they were from a faraway country.
Right. I think you have the Cainites, Cainites, before the flood, and then you have the Cainites
Right.
again, Kenites, after the flood.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they're both, because I know you like to look at the original Hebrew and try to get your best out of it, and I do too. I try to do my best. I'm not a scholar, but I try to, because I think it's important to find the answers, is to look at the root word and look at the original text as you can, the original Hebrew if you can, and what the words can actually mean. So from what I found is that the Kenites, the K-E-N and the K-I-K or the C-A-I-N are pretty much, they almost come from the same root Hebrew word. So
Right.
the same group. And I think it's in First Chronicles, I think, where they said the Kenites were actually, they became the scribes of the Pharisees. Am I correct?
Right. Yeah.
That's what I found.
did.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's where you started to get your corruption in the clergy side of things.
Right.
And of course, being taken off to Babylon didn't help, I'm sure, because then you started getting the Talmud and you started getting the influences of Babylonian paganism and that surely didn't help out the Israelites at all either. So now, by the time it came to Jesus, these Kenites who were just started out as the scribes, and I'm sure they got promoted like a bat boy, or like, you know, a bat boy in a baseball team, and they want to play eventually, and eventually they probably did. And so eventually, at the time of Jesus, and when they were shouting, crucify him, you were getting the fulfillment of prophecy, because these seeds of the serpent of Cain, the Kenites, were actually the ones that wanted to bruise his heel. And they were out there saying, kill him, kill him, kill him. And Jesus was the one, when he rose from the dead, actually came back and bruised his head and fulfilled that prophecy of Genesis 3:15. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because you know the whole prophecy in Genesis 3:15, it all ties back to David and Goliath as well. When David killed the Philistine champion Goliath, and he ran up to him and used his own sword to cut off his head. It was his head. He took it back to Jerusalem to show it to the Israelites that he had killed the Philistine champion, and that they no longer had to worry about Goliath nor the Philistines. But afterwards, after parading it and showing it, and revealing that he did, with the help of Yahuwah, to kill this champion, that head was buried at Golgotha, meaning Goliath of Gath. And so we know that, being a giant, he was most certainly Serpent Seed. And so when his head was buried there on Golgotha at Calvary, the hill of the skull, when Yeshua was crucified on the cross, that's when that prophecy was fulfilled. Goliath's skull was nipping at his heel at the same time as he was crushing the skull of the Serpent Seed. And so, yeah, so I read an entire chapter about that as well.
Oh, wow. That is.
All right, hold on, Brett. We'll be right back for final segment here. All right, welcome back, everybody, for a final segment. I'm gonna just turn it over to you, Brett, and I want you to just speak about, these last two volumes. Anything that of interest that you want to bring forth. I'm guessing the title, being of the Tower of Babel. Why don't you cover that as well?
Okay. When we talk about the Tower of Babel, obviously Babel means that a person is not making sense. So that was the curse given by God to the people, that they disperse and not really be able to communicate with each other. So if logic tells us that if that's what the curse was, is that's what his punishment was, they were probably trying to all get together, communicate, and be one. That was their drive. So we look at that and we think, okay, what might be the parallels today? And communication does seem to be the biggest thing out there. Everybody wants to stay connected. Everybody has a cell phone. Everybody wants to be almost one again, united. You got the internet. That's uniting the world, and it's changed the world. So you have those parallels seemingly again from the past, that everybody was on the same drive to be in the same page. And today you have a lot of people pushing everybody to be on the same page again. And that's pretty much how they had the parallels. One interesting story that, and again, this is an extra biblical story, but it basically said that and I think it was Legends of the Jews, Zen, I know you have that book for sale, which I really enjoy those volumes. I think each person had such a desire for this, they inscribed their own name on each brick of the Tower of Babel, and they brought it up there, and that's what they helped to build it. So everybody probably had their own 2 cents worth that they wanted to put into this. And it's funny that, today we have our own version of a brick. I mean, cell phones used to be called bricks when they first came out because they were so big, but we all have our own names on our own little cell phones now. They're all, each one of us, and it's just parallel. They're methods of communication, and it's uniting us, and that the internet is uniting us once again. Whether we're going to stay on the Christian path or whether we're going to stay on the path of righteousness is another story. But we just have to be kind of careful of going down that same pathway as they did in that whole Tower of Babel scenario and story. I mean, it was all about pride back then. It was all about us rather than God, humanity being the wherewithal, humanity being the last call, if you will. Okay? That is absolutely what God abhors and does not want. And basically, it's all over the Bible how they would continue to look at humanity's measure of all things rather than God's measure of all things as the real way to live and to go about. And that's where you get all this secular humanism, you get all this political correctness, you got man's interpretation of what is right and what is wrong. Agree?
Yeah,
Okay.
and also, that was one of the first attempts to establish a new world order.
All right.
Right. And world government and its connections to all of that as well.
Right. Yeah. Nimrod actually went around, and when he helped to rebuild those 7 cities after the flood, he had his own first empire, and there you go, and you had your first rejuvenation of the ways of Cain, and now the religion of Cain, the religion of ancestor worship, the worship of the serpent, his father.
Right.
And you see serpent worship almost everywhere you go nowadays. As far as when you look in history books, they always bring a serpent into this for some reason, and you wonder why. What's so special about a serpent if it wasn't maybe a symbol of something before?
Right, absolutely, yeah. Even the elites, they worship the tree and the phallic symbols and the egg and fertility symbols as far as the sexual icons. And in my opinion, the reason they do so is because they are celebrating, honoring, and worshiping what occurred in the garden with
Absolutely.
the beguilement of Eve, and that is their origins of where they come from and who they are. And again, most people don't understand that. We don't recognize that as far as, because again, the whole thing with the garden is mostly hidden. Everybody thinks an apple, but they have no idea what it's truly connected to, what the fruit was. And that is where, Cain comes from, and the whole Illuminati bloodline. They are all connected to that as far as the tree and these sexual icons and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you, Zen, on that. I think they meant it as a great slap in the face to God, in my opinion. It's almost like this is the thing that freed us. This is the thing that made us free and made us free from the bondage of your godly ways. This is our new way of man. I think you're exactly right, and I think that sexuality and why it's such a pervasive. I mean, it's desire, I understand, but why that in religious belief is so pervasive and so celebrated is that fact. And if you didn't do the research and you didn't want to connect it to anything in the Garden of Eden, people probably won't get it.
Oh, absolutely not. And, most people are afraid to even go there because I know a lot of researchers that they will take it back to Genesis 6, but in my opinion, Genesis 6 would have never have happened if Genesis 3 had not occurred, because it makes mention in like the Perk-Day Rabbi Eleazar, the legends of the patriarchs and the prophets, these stories as far as the legends of the Jews, about that it was the daughters of Cain that the Watchers went specifically to. And
Right.
so they were already hybrid, in my opinion.
Right, and not only were they the bloodlines, they made the choices. They
Right, exactly.
They were grafted into the ways of Cain. I mean, and that's why a lot of the sons of Adam got grafted in the same way. I mean, it just, like I said, there's always two ways to go towards God, and there's always two ways to go away from God. Is the bloodlines and your choice, your free will.
Right. Right, absolutely. And so, yeah, I think, again, I haven't read yet your 2 other volumes, but, I've already been spending a lot of time on your first volume as far as The Way of Cain. Thoroughly enjoying it. Definitely going to take some time to get through all of the material, but I'm looking forward to what are some of the other themes and some of the other concepts that you cover in the last 2 books.
In the last 2 books, I do talk about the lost 10 tribes. It wasn't
very cool.
It wasn't a primary focus, but some of these things just come to be because, as I said, when one answer or one question gets answered, another one opens. So I felt the need to start to look at the lost 10 tribes, and I believe that they were actually brought up, and they went to the Caucasus Mountains, and then they did end up in Europe, and whether bloodline or grafted on, if they made free will choices to follow the ways of God, you have a lot of those type of people, Christian godly beliefs into that area. And Jesus said, "I'm looking for my lost sheep." And they did go into those areas of Europe after his death, burial, and resurrection. So could these lost sheep be actually the other 10 tribes that he's looking for? I mean, he has the 2 right in front of him. They're not lost. They're just, maybe they're not really respecting or understanding that who he is, but there are some other lost tribes. There's people somewhere. So I get into that a lot, and because it's almost a necessity, and that's another thing that gets really, really downed today when anybody even brings that up, that, the lost 10 tribes, would that be the people of Europe? Could there be the Saxons in England as the son of Isaac?
Mm-hmm, right.
I mean, there's a lot of things to look at, but again, it's to destroy a people, you have to sever the roots. That's a quote I have, and that's a very good quote. So from what I've researched, basically when the Assyrians grabbed these tribes, these 10 tribes, what they did for, I don't know if it was 100 years or 200 years or a while, they said to them, okay, we're gonna erase your existence and your memory of who you were. And they basically taught them, you can't say the names Israel, you can't say the names, you can't even, they tried to brainwash them, and they tried to turn them into people that don't even know their names and who they were from and their pride. So they basically almost had nothing left when they were able to escape the Assyrians back then. And that's practically why they don't know exactly who they are or where they come from, is because they have been trained and they have been educated for a whole great number of years. Why? Now, again, one of the fulfillments of, I guess, Jesus being actually the Messiah is that he would bring the 12 tribes together. And a lot of people of the Jewish faith now may say that, no, he didn't bring the 12 tribes together because we only got 2 or 3 here. We're not looking for we haven't found the other 10, but through Christianity, might he have brought them together? Because under God again. Because we both, basically, the true believers of God, Jewish or Christian, are going to believe in essentially the same things if you really get down to it.
Right.
And there are corruptions that I get in as far as religious beliefs, and I get into a lot of things in our society today that we look at, and I take it as more of a centrist, in the middle of the road type of person here. I don't want to go on one side, the far right, the far left, or any side like that. I try to be in the center of the road. So there are some principles of Christian thought that I don't exactly agree with, and it's because I did the research. But I see the reason why even these ways that they're taught nowadays is because it helps maintain order, it helps maintain people in the pews, and helps maintain our just basically sitting down, being quiet and listening, and not really taking any strides on our own. So on both sides of the political coin, I believe there's issues, and I go into some of those in this second volume. And of course, we talk about Esau in these volumes too, and he becomes very important because the Edomites, in one faction, we talked about there's corruption in Judaism, but of course, some of these sources that I've researched say that the Edomites actually came to form, they didn't form Rome, but they came into it and they joined with the people of Rome and helped teach them some of their ways. And now you've got Rome declaring war on Israel, the true Israel, and you've got Rome trying to usurp them because, of course, deep down inside, you've got Edomite philosophies and beliefs trying to get back their birthright.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then it also tells us in prophecy, that when Esau had his birthright usurped from him, he asked Abraham, "Do you have any blessing for me?" And he told him that, you will rule by the sword, you will live by the sword, and at the end of days, you will shake off your brother's yoke. And so, that is also part of prophecy, Jacob's trouble, all of that. And so do you cover also like as far as the fig tree generation, the blooming of the fig tree? What do you think of that?
I think it's Israel and all those that are grafted. I really didn't do as much research into Israel and their role into the end times. Obviously, I was stuck on more on identifying the enemy and learning from that. So, yeah, I can't say that I've done too much research on the budding of the fig tree, but I've done enough to kind of understand that I believe that is the Israeli blood and grafted people.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that was the sign for our generation, that we are at the time of the end, that seeing the fig tree bloom, Satan also, it's been since that time, 1947, the last 70 years, that things have been accelerated, so much, the Dead Sea Scrolls being found, the Nag Hammadi codices. I mean, so much has happened in the last 70 years, and I think that, just as Legion said to Yeshua, recognizing him as the Son of God, have you come to torment us before the time? They know that now is the time and that their gig is almost up.
Yeah, that's where didn't the serpent supposed to be released because his time is short?
Mm-hmm, right.
And I agree with you that they're becoming they're bold. They don't mind actually saying it and bringing it out in the open because, for one, I think it's exposed, but I think there's an esoteric, almost an esoteric power to actually bring it out and to show people what you're doing. I think they think it gives them more power. Don't you agree?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And there seems to be, that is part of what they write about in the protocols as far as bragging. I think also too that God requires them. And yeah. So.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think God requires them because it's almost like he wants to give people at least one chance to see and make a decision, right?
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Because otherwise, if people wouldn't see it and read it in their own words, and in their own books about how they worship the devil and Lucifer is God, and even at the end of days, Albert Pike speaks about in his visions of 3 world wars that they're going to bring forth the pure doctrine of Lucifer and reveal the Antichrist. I mean, it's something more to hear it from their own words and their own writings and what they talk about. Because otherwise, I think most people would just, oh, that's tinfoil hat, conspiracy, whatever. And but seeing it in their own words, it definitely brings it to light, makes it real.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring these books out and get as many people to read them, is because I tried to put it out in an unbiased or just an open manner. You could just read it, and because all we got left and all we got with us then is the written words, right? I mean, when especially like the Garden of Eden, it's gone. There's no physical thing we could practically say that proves the Garden of Eden because we were not even sure where it is. So all we've got now is the written words, and we've got our own discernment and our own desire to learn more. I mean, I find that people who like these books and to look at them, they just know, it just clicks in them. I'm sure you're probably like that too, or people like that. There's a lot of people that don't bother, and that's fine, but there are those people who are just yearning to find something more, and they know there's something and they want to learn it, they just don't know where to go to. And once they find it, it just clicks, and they're like, aha, I knew it. I knew there was something more. And that's kind of how I was this whole time, and that's what I try to put into these books. I try to make them as informative as possible and let you decide. And I try to use the only thing that we really have left are these written words, these ancient words, and all these things that we still have to make your own decisions. And I think you'll agree with me that, if it's put together in a way like I try to, but if it's put together in a way where it's understandable and it's rational and it makes sense that, okay, like the serpent, doesn't have vocal cords, or an actual snake doesn't have vocal cords. Okay, could it be something more? Could it be a description of a seraph, a wise doctorate being? Okay, that's what they said. Be as wise as serpents. It said that in the Bible. Okay, what are you talking about? What does that mean? Because the serpents of the world here, they're not really that wise. They're maybe a little sneaky when they go to want to get prey, but I wouldn't really call a serpent really wise, So those type of things, those kind of words in the Bible and thoughts, the best thing to do is to actually research the original Hebrew and try to look at what other words that they might mean, because in English, words can mean more than one thing. And a lot of these people who did the translations, I'm sure they had their best of intentions, but they also everybody is different, and everybody has their own thoughts of either the way they were taught or the perceptions or pressures put on them to interpret them certain ways. So that's why I left this book open. I left it open so people could actually make their own decisions. I give you all that I've found from all the different parts of the four corners of the internet, the virtual world. But I want the people to be able to see, okay, Mark of Cain. Okay, that could be actually not just an insignia. That could be something different. Why? What's wrong with menstruation? Why do women have to suffer that? Why? All these little questions that people start to think, they come to light when you read what could be the real story and the whole story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree, and I think that's one of the reasons why people appreciate my work. I help to bring forth the underlying truth, which unites the ancient mysteries, the mythologies, even the pagan teachings together with the truth and the prophetic word, to tie together the biblical story with the ancient archaeology and what we see as far as the megalithic structures, and that's why I want to introduce people to your work as well, because I think you do a grand job in similar manner as myself in bringing forth that truth. And like I said, you are a confirming witness, as Dr. Joy was, for the work that I do. And so,
thank you, Zen. That's it's very nice compliment of you. Appreciate that.
yeah, no worries, brother. I want to help you to be more read and introduce people to your work. I know that you haven't done a lot of radio shows and that you don't have the platform that I do, but we'll definitely be doing more shows together as well. We've got about 3 minutes remaining, brother. I want to give you a chance to give out your website, your contact information, where people can go to find and support your stuff, and then final commentary.
Okay, sounds good. Then Zen, thank you. Like I said, the websites are mysterybabylon.com. Pretty simple. That gives you the snippets, might give you even part of the chapters of the books. So it gives you a taste and feel of what the books are about. Next one is more of just a very simple, easy read, mystery-babylon.org. And that's more of just if you want to find out a little about Cain. What do they mean, son of the serpent? What do you mean? How many survivors of the flood were there? Were there only eight family members of Noah that survived the flood? Who were the giants? And stuff like that. That gets into more of just simple things, but it helps to get you more informed and get you down into even wanting to know more and more of these mysteries. And both of those have, as I said, the books on sale, cheaper than probably the cheapest out there, $3 or $4 off of Amazon. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, it's on other booksellers. You just look it up, it'd be on there.
What about the titles again?
The titles are The Rise of Mystery Babylon. Volume 1 is The Way of Cain. It's a long title, but The Rise of Mystery Babylon is a series. So Volume 1 is The Way of Cain. And Volume 2 is The Tower of Babel. It's split into 2 volumes, so Part 1, Part 2. Tower of Babel is Part 2. The Way of Cain gets into a little more of the cultural aspects, the parallels that we see then to today, and the societal aspects that we might see in our society. And the second one gets into more of politics, why people, what's political correctness, what is it actually, what is the secular humanism, what is all these ways and the New World Order and all these things that we're getting pushed around to, and how did it work back in the day, back in the Way of Cain? Because once we see back then, we get such a clearer light into what is going on now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Looking forward to doing a follow-up sometime, brother. Maybe
definitely.
A few weeks
I would really appreciate it.
Down the road, and give me a chance to read more of your material. And you'll be receiving my books here shortly as well. And you'll also get a chance to check out the Flat Earth trilogy as well. And so, I'd love to get your viewpoint on some of that material as well.
Eventually, I love it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, lots of reading, lots of studying to do. But there's a question from the chat room. Well, we're probably not going to be able to get to it, but
I could try.
We'll answer it next time. Yeah, we're already at the end. All right, God bless all. Good night.
Thank you, and thank you, Zen. Good night, all.
Hello. Be blessed, Fred.
Shalom.
Later, all. Good night.